Okay, today we're going to talk about something you probably take for granted, infinity. But what if I told you that our whole way of thinking about it is just wrong? What if infinity isn't really a number or some far-off place, but actually a bug in our own logic? Let's get into a pretty radical take on one of the biggest ideas in math. Right off the bat, this source does not pull any punches. It opens with this incredibly bold statement, calling infinity a disease. So we're not talking about a simple disagreement here. The argument is that this concept is actively harming our ability to think clearly. This really sets the stage for the critique we're about to unpack.
So let's dive into the first big idea that this is a disease of language. The argument is, in fields like math and formal logic, where everything has to be super precise, just casually throwing around the word infinity is a huge problem. It's seen as a total departure from the strict foundational rules, that axiomatic rigor that these entire fields are built on. And this is where things get really interesting. The whole idea is being reframed. The argument goes that when we say infinity, we're not actually describing a thing that exists out there. Nope. We're just pointing to the very edge of what our brains can comprehend. It's a cognitive limit. So, to keep using it like it's some exact term is, from this perspective, intellectually dishonest.
Okay, so that brings us to the absolute core of the problem. If infinity is such a big deal, why? Well, the argument is pretty simple. We can't actually define it. We've failed to come up with a solid, verifiable definition for what it is. And if you can't define something, how on earth can you use it in systems that demand absolute certainty? And really, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? The whole argument really hinges on the idea that nobody can give a straight answer to this. We can talk about what infinity does in an equation, sure, but we can't seem to pin down what it fundamentally is. And look, this isn't just a problem in one little corner of science. It's everywhere. In mathematics, it's basically a leap of faith. In physics and cosmology, talking about infinite space is an untestable claim, because as the source puts it, we cannot go there. And just in general, it's described as a semantic virus that just waters down the precision of any argument it touches. This slide just lays it all out perfectly. You've got this massive conflict. Real science needs precision, definitions you can test, and solid, rigorous logic. But what does the concept of infinity give us? Well, according to this argument, it gives us the exact opposite: imprecision, a total lack of definition, and what the source bluntly calls handwaving. So if we can't really define infinity, what are we even using it for? Well, this section argues that it's basically become a kind of intellectual crutch. It's a shortcut we take when we run up against a really hard conceptual problem.
And this hand-waving is a really key idea. It's what happens when our models break down, when we hit a wall. Instead of saying, hey, we don't know, we just plug in the word infinity, and poof, the problem seems to disappear. It's a way of saying it just goes on forever, without doing the tough work of figuring out what that really means. Now, this isn't just a minor issue. It has huge consequences for logic. Think of a logical argument like a chain. Every single link has to be strong for the conclusion to be true. But according to this view, the moment you introduce an undefined term, like the infinity symbol, it's like putting a broken link right in the middle. The whole chain just falls apart and your conclusion ends up being meaningless. All right, so after all that doom and gloom, is there a solution? Well, yeah. The point isn't to just ban the word forever. Instead, the proposal is to reframe it, to start using it in a way that's actually useful and, more importantly, intellectually honest. First, let's just be clear about the old way, the thing this argument is pushing against. For a long, long time, infinity has been treated like it's a real, concrete thing, an exact number you could almost point to, a specific place you could go. And here's the new proposal. It's a simple but really profound shift in thinking. Let's reclassify infinity. Let's stop pretending it's an exact quantity and start calling it what it actually is, a useful approximation. It's a symbol that tells us a process keeps going beyond the practical limits of what we can measure or model. And the benefits of doing this are actually pretty huge. The source calls it an act of epistemic hygiene, basically cleaning up our thinking. It forces us to be honest and admit the limits of our own knowledge. It leads to clearer conversations, and maybe most importantly, it puts the focus back on being rigorous instead of just taking the convenient route. It's about clarity over dogma. And that all brings us to the final, and I think most powerful part of this whole argument. After laying out the problem and a possible solution, the tables are turned. A direct challenge is issued to anyone who wants to stick with the old way of thinking about infinity. And there it is. The gauntlet is thrown down. The argument is basically saying the burden of proof is now on you. If you think infinity is a real exact concept, fine, go ahead and define it for us, properly. And the final punch is the prediction that you just can't do it. It's a pretty provocative way to end, leaving us all with a fundamental question to chew on.